Hello and welcome to Speaking of Alzheimer's. I'm your host, Beth Mugin. Thanks for joining us today. This show brings information and support to our community about Alzheimer's and related dementias, and we're very happy that you've joined us today. I'm very pleased to introduce my guest, Jim Sisto. Jim is with the Berkshire Elder Law Center, and I'm very happy to have you with us.
Great to be here, Beth.
Thank you. Jim and I have had the opportunity to work together over the years, and I come from a medical background, Jim from the legal background, and you have a wonderful new program that we're going to talk about. But first of all, what would you like to introduce our audience to about you?
Well, I've been practicing in estate planning and elder law for 28 years now. I've been a resident of Berkshire County. I moved up from New York City many years ago. And I have a passion for estate planning and the elderly. And mainly that was probably because of my grandmother who had Alzheimer's, and she lived with us growing up. And when she contracted the disease, it was, devastating to the family. But I saw what could happen when the family comes together to take care of somebody that has Alzheimer's and needs a lot of care. Luckily for my grandmother, she had three wonderfully amazing daughters who took care of her, and they took turns. She passed away in 1993, and I think when I moved up here and started my practice of law, I moved into that direction, and that's been my passion ever since.
Wonderful, and my passion as well, with also a family member, and you've just really opened our discussion today to families who, just like yours, have someone that they're caring for and really looking for some information. So
yeah, it's a traumatic event when somebody is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Whether it's themselves, how do they come to grips with it, thinking that it's the end of the world and their life is going to change forever. It's an incredible amount of uncertainty and stress on the family. What's going to happen, what's the stages of the disease from day 1 to year 5 or 10? Where are you going to be living? Are you going to lose your house? How do you pay for it all? I mean,
sure.
We know that healthcare is very expensive. It's like $225 billion for the healthcare costs
sure.
in this country. I mean, it's unheard of, and so this is what people go to sleep at night worrying about.
That's right.
They need peace of mind,
yeah.
And so I think. So why I'm here today is I was fortunate enough to be invited to become a founding member of a new organization called the National Alliance of Attorneys for Alzheimer's Planning. I know it's a mouthful, but the initial meeting was held down in Orlando, and I went down there with elder law attorneys from all over the country. And what came out of it, there was a lot of presenters and talking about our practices, but what came out of it was this guide, an all-encompassing guide that talks about, and I guess I'll hold this up. It's a guide to Alzheimer's care, and it covers everything from soup to nuts, and it's a good introduction for somebody who's been diagnosed.
Good. So for today, I was wondering if you could bring us more of the legal perspective. What should people be thinking of first when it comes to planning and someone has Alzheimer's? From a legal perspective, what are the documents that are important, for example?
The most important document would be the power of attorney, because getting eligible for programs that can pay for care is, and we can talk a little bit about the programs, but mostly they're mass health based,
right,
or Medicaid programs, and being eligible for them is very important, and is the difference between life savings being dissipated. So if you're eligible for those programs, you could get care in the home, nursing homes paid for, all kinds of things. But they're asset-based, they're income-based, And it's very complicated. It's a maze of
Right.
regulations.
And the financial piece is so devastatingly important to families. They're fearful of what's going to happen. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose everything.
That's
How
correct.
am I going to take care of my care? And I don't want to be a burden to my children, is what we often hear as well.
Yeah, so a backtrack on the power of attorney is a legal document where you appoint somebody to make financial decisions for you if you can't. So that person you appoint can deal with your insurance company, can deal with transferring property, can deal with investment companies, the banks, and it may be as simple as transferring the house out of the Medicaid applicant's name into their spouse. But if somebody is incapacitated and can't sign, you can, by the fact that you're a spouse, just sign their name and transfer the house into your own name.
Right. So as we know from Alzheimer's, these things need to be planned for almost as soon as we know there's memory issues and problems happening.
That's right.
Maybe about the same time that a diagnosis is made for Alzheimer's or some other kind of a dementia, because those are the times when the individual can sign and designate who their power of attorney is going to be.
Correct.
Does
So
it have
these
to
are-
be
well, go ahead.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Does it have to be a family member that's a power of attorney?
No, it could be a friend, a business associate. Most people would spouse, child, but it doesn't have to. I mean, I have a lot of clients who feel that a particular person in their family isn't financially savvy enough or just not stable enough
Okay.
to make those decisions, and
Okay.
they'd rather have a sibling or a close friend.
Do sometimes attorneys serve as power of attorney for people?
Yes, they could in rare circumstances.
But it's more
most
rare.
attorneys usually frown upon it, and it's a last case scenario
Okay.
where somebody might, even like being somebody's executor under a will, you'd say, well, it usually doesn't happen unless somebody has no other person to turn to.
Okay, so first, power of attorney is a really important document to have.
A healthcare proxy.
Okay.
Now, a healthcare proxy in Massachusetts, we're different than other states which have living wills, but a healthcare proxy is where you appoint someone to make medical decisions for you. In some states, it's called healthcare powers of attorney, but in Massachusetts, we call it a healthcare proxy.
And the healthcare proxies I know a little bit about, because they also can be a very simple document that people can do at home or
correct.
sometimes in the doctor's office, but to designate someone that can speak for them on their behalf if they cannot speak for themselves.
And so the way the statute has it, you designate a person to make decisions when you can't. And just because you've appointed somebody under a healthcare proxy to make decisions for you, that authority is not effective immediately. A doctor has to invoke the proxy to say that this person is incapable of making medical decisions, and therefore it is now, we turn to the healthcare proxy appointed.
And that's a pretty interesting conversation to have between a family and a doctor. I know it often will happen in healthcare settings, like a long-term care setting, a nursing home, some assisted living, where the doctor can actually work with and get the person designated as needing the healthcare proxy invoked. But as a general rule in the community, it's a little more challenging to get those things to happen. But back to the legal documents. So we have the power of attorney, we have the healthcare proxy.
And another newer document is medical orders for life-sustaining treatment. It's a MOLST, and I like to refer to it as a healthcare proxy on steroids.
Okay.
So for like the healthcare proxy, when you appoint somebody, the person you appoint is supposed to do what you want. So it's very important to communicate with that person what
Right.
you want. One way of communicating is something called the 5 wishes. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Absolutely, sure.
So the 5 wishes is like a health proxy, but it's a document that goes through step by step, asks the person who's filling it out certain questions to get them in the right frame of mind so that they know if the person they're appointing is in fact the one they want to appoint. Health proxies can be revocable at any time, which a lot of people don't know that. Now, streamlining over to the MOLST form, MOLST, are you familiar with a DNR?
I've actually
Okay,
done
so,
most forms with some of
okay.
my patients and
So
clients.
what I meant to say before, a most form is like a DNR on steroids.
Yeah.
Do not resuscitate form,
Right.
but that's only for,
And that form does have to be signed by the physician and by the patient or the healthcare proxy if
So
it's
a
been
most
invoked.
form is the same way. It's got to be reviewed by a doctor, nurse practitioner, physician's assistant with the person. But it doesn't just deal with resuscitation, it deals with artificial hydration, nutrition,
Right.
Transfers to the hospital,
Right.
chemotherapy,
Dialysis.
and all those things that people don't generally have on the top of their mind until they're in the middle of it.
Right.
I had, when I would, in the past, I would fill out people's health proxy forms and not give it any thought until I had a personal experience with a person who had a feeding tube, and you're like, wow, okay, now I get it. That's something like I had no real world experience of
Right.
it.
Well, I'm sure I hope it worked out well for you,
Yeah.
for the person.
So, yeah, I guess, Alzheimer's, cancer patients, a lot of what's contained in this guide is applicable to people with other diseases as well.
So you're promoting planning as soon as they can in the process. I think one of the things I hear a lot from families is, I have to go into the nursing home, I'm going to lose my home. Can you speak a little bit
Sure.
about some of those sorts
So,
of things?
The nursing homes are always painted as the big, as the devil, and people there's a lot of misinformation out there. People get misinformation from the neighbor up the street, people at the nursing facility, and the bulk of it is wrong,
Right.
and just misinterpreted. But one of the big things is, I'm going to lose my home. Now, just because you go into a nursing home doesn't mean you're going to lose your home, especially if you're a married couple. So the way the rules work, your home is actually an exempt asset. So even if you were single, you could still apply for Medicaid and be eligible. However, after your death, the state has the right to go back against your estate
Right.
and put a lien against it, so that when your kids go to sell your property. However, the goal is to keep it outside of your estate. So if you're married, you would just simply transfer your house to your spouse who's still living in the community, and then have that spouse change their will. So in case that spouse dies first, it doesn't end up back in the name of the nursing home spouse.
So when they transfer a house and make those arrangements, who actually pays for the nursing home?
So there's no prohibition against spouses transferring assets. So when a person goes into a nursing home, if they're going to apply for Medicaid or Mass Health, they're only allowed to have $2,000 of assets in their own name. So most of people, husbands or wives, they have joint assets. So when you apply for Medicaid, you have to change the ownership, change the title of the ownership to the person who is healthy and not applying for Medicaid.
And now you've mentioned power of attorney. Is that something that the power of attorney may
Yes.
be involved with, even with a spouse?
So
Possibly.
great example here is, let's say this person in the nursing home has a $50,000 IRA. That IRA has to be liquidated, and then the assets can be transferred to the spouse at home. The spouse at home has no authority without a power of attorney to access or liquidate that IRA.
I see.
That's why it's so important to have power of attorney.
Okay. And are those things that families have to do all by themselves, liquidate assets and change houses? And
They really do need guidance, because as I said, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of that Medicaid application alone is like 30 pages.
yeah, it's pretty.
And-
I've had the experience of having done them for many people. Sometimes the nursing homes have someone that can help them with the Mass Health Medicaid applications,
That's
and
true,
sometimes
and they
you
do a
probably
great job.
and sometimes you probably help.
I do. We get the more complicated ones. For instance, if there's trust involved or transfers of assets, because under the Medicaid laws, you can't give away assets, and then apply for Medicaid within 5 years of giving away those assets. Now, there are a bunch of exceptions, and that's why people don't realize that. And that's why it's important to contact somebody who knows what they're doing, or at least...
Like an elder law attorney.
Correct.
Okay, very good.
The other thing, I go back to the family home, even if you're single, if you have a child living in the home with you, and that child has lived there for 2 years, and that child provides care for you that keeps you out of the nursing home, you could actually transfer or gift the house to your child without incurring any penalties or preventing you from obtaining Medicaid that you need.
So for some of these questions, if people maybe weren't comfortable first talking to an attorney, is that something that like EcuHealthcare can answer some of those sorts of questions?
Well, not really. EcuHealthcare is I refer people to them all the time. They do a great job. There's a lot of people there who are unbelievable. I mean, it's complicated, but they deal more with health insurance.
Okay.
Most health insurances don't pay for this type of care.
Okay.
They may for a little while, like Medicare, and a lot of people get confused between Medicare and Medicaid.
Correct.
Medicare essentially is health insurance, like any other health insurance, whereas Medicaid, you have to pass a financial test in order to be eligible.
Okay.
It's for chronic illnesses.
Another thing that happens a lot is, people will hear Medicare will pay for the nursing home for up to 100 days. And as we know, that isn't always true.
Correct.
Because the person needs to be able to participate in skilled therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. So it may not be 100 days, it may only be a couple of weeks. So Medicare stops paying, and then the individual has to be worried about those things.
The other thing that's is important is that they only pay if you're in a hospital for 3 days, and you have to have 3 qualified stays.
Right.
Now, when I first started practicing, somebody would go into the hospital, and the hospital would keep them there for 3 days, and if they had the 3-day stay, then they could go to a nursing home.
Right.
Now,
and have Medicare pay for it.
you could have somebody go to a hospital for 5 days, and they still won't pay because they say, well, that wasn't a qualified stay. We didn't know, you were just there for observation. We didn't really diagnose what was wrong with you.
Right.
So then when that person goes to a nursing home and they find out that they're paying $375 a day,
Right.
That's big.
Pretty devastating.
If you have the 3 days in a hospital, Medicare will pay 100% of the first 20 days. And then if you need skilled care from day 21 to 100, they pay 80% with your supplemental health insurance, if you have it, paying the other 20. If you don't have it, those people would have to apply for Medicaid from day 21 to 100 to get covered as well.
You've mentioned that you've been here in practice doing law for a long time. I'm sure you've seen the criteria change over the years for how things are covered and how things are handled. And I'm sure that you stay right up in touch with all of those changes.
I do.
And with this new project, the Guide for Alzheimer's Care, this is very exciting, and this is just being rolled out, if I'm not mistaken.
That's true. I don't have it up on my website yet, but it should be up in a couple of weeks. So my website is berkshireelderlaw.com.
Okay.
And there's a whole bunch of information about estate planning, real estate transfers, the basics of Medicaid, and we can go over that a little.
So if people go to your website, when this is on it, they actually have access for free to look at this
there'll
whole
be
guide?
they'll digitally be able to download this or just print it out.
Okay.
Another document that I'm going to put up there is called Caring and Communicating with the Alzheimer's Patient, and gives tips for people how to deal with somebody who has Alzheimer's.
The biggest thing being, don't argue with someone.
Right. Distract.
Yep.
Don't argue. If somebody says, oh, I want to go out to dinner with my brother, and the brother's been dead for 20 years or 10 years, you don't say, no, Grandpa, he's dead, what's the matter with you? You just don't do that.
Yeah.
You could say, well, I don't think he's ready to eat right now.
Yeah,
You know,
or
just
maybe saying
maybe
something
tomorrow.
like, maybe tomorrow.
Or
Yeah.
if they say, I want to go home, you say, well, I want to go home too. You don't say, no, you can't.
You haven't lived in your house in 40 years,
right,
those
right.
kind of
So,
things, yeah.
You know, it's all, in the end, it's common sense.
Yeah.
You know, just be gentle. And
There's so much to talk about with the care of persons with Alzheimer's and related dementias, and that's why this show is so important. My guest is Jim Sisto. He's an attorney with the Berkshire Elder Law Center. And you know, you have some wonderful information to share with our audience, and I'm so pleased that you're here. So this will be rolled out probably in the next few weeks
2 or
or
3
months,
weeks, probably.
and it's a brand new program.
And if anybody wants it, they can call my office for a copy. We'll gladly
Okay.
mail them a copy. 664-7700. I also have something I call, I've been marketing it for years. I call it my Home and Savings Protection Kit, and it talks about, you know, the advantages of transferring your house to your children while retaining a life estate. It has a what you need to know to protect your life savings, which is essentially all about Medicaid and those types of things.
Okay. And having worked with you over a number of years in the community in the Berkshires, I know that there's lots of training and education that you give free of charge, like today, you know, being here.
I enjoy it very much, and since I've got re-energized, I mean, I used to do a lot of fundraising for the Alzheimer's Association, and I'd speak at various senior centers and nursing homes, and over the last year I've started to increase my participation. So within the next year, I'm probably going to do like 8 to 10 presentations similar to this one, and even more comprehensive.
And probably talking about this guide and about the caring and communication pieces, that's really important.
Yes.
I know that you're also aware of an organization in the community called the Berkshire Alzheimer's Partnership. I'm a volunteer with that partnership, and we do a lot of programs and support things like the Caregiver Expo that was held fairly recently. We do something on the longest day, which is June 21st, and of course the Walk to End Alzheimer's, and I know that you have some participation in that as well. You also are aware that I do a support group, a caregiver support group.
Yes, and I'm very happy that we reconnected, because it's all about teamwork and people reaching out. And we talked earlier that the biggest problem is when somebody doesn't want help. So you have family members who are, you know, besides themselves, trying to figure out how they can care for their person in the home. You know, how can mom and dad get some help because they're falling, or you know, they're just making poor decisions, but they don't want it.
Yeah.
So if they don't want it, that's the hardest situation, because there's no magic pill or magic wand that can say, poof, mom and dad are now in this cocoon of safety.
And then there's always the story about, well, I'm the daughter and I'm gonna become the mother to the mother and take care of things. It doesn't work, guys. It doesn't work. So
The main thing is to get advice early on,
Yes.
have open communication, and talk about them things.
and be able to express things that are frustrating and very difficult to deal with. And
Like, when do they give up the keys? You know,
Yes.
I try to have an early conversation before it's even on the table. So, for instance, if your driving skills are starting to deteriorate, and maybe your spouse knows but you don't know, if somebody came to you that you trust and said, you know, John, I think it's time to, because most people don't give it up easily.
No, not at all. And sometimes it's a stranger, so-called stranger, like yourself or maybe myself or the local police or something, that might have to have the conversation. I usually advise that the person most closely related to providing care, usually it's a spouse or a family member, is the last person that can really make that happen, because you're needed to bring things forward and to take care on a daily basis, and you can't also be the bad guy. So.
Right, but also they don't want to, you know, you're not the expert. You just live with me and take care of me. This guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
A lot of times I'll have a spouse call me before the meeting or after the meeting to say, you know, my husband is starting to be very forgetful, but he won't admit it. So, you know, how do we gently lead them down the path where to acknowledge that he or she needs help.
That's a really important strategy that, not only before going to talk to an attorney, but also going to talk to the doctor in advance if family members can say, this is what's really happening, could you kind of direct the conversation in that way?
Yeah.
Those are really important
Most
strategic.
doctors will
Yeah.
accept input from a
Yeah.
family, especially if that family member has power of attorney or is a healthcare
That's
agent,
right.
just to, information is key. And if
Sure.
the doctor has more information to make a decision,
And if they carry some weight with the
Of
individual.
course.
If they're going to be willing to listen to the doctor or to the attorney or sometimes to the priest or the clergy in the area. Those are
Whoever.
really important strategies. So let's talk again about the Guide to Alzheimer's Care, that this is a new project that you're bringing to our community. Again, thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, you're welcome.
So you're going to roll this out. It's going to be available on your website. Would you say the website again?
It's BerkshireElderLaw.com. My phone number is 413-664-7700. You can call and just order. It's free. But there is a lot of other information on my website. But if you want this Guide to Alzheimer's Care, just call my office and you'll get a free
And I believe
copy.
this has been a collaboration with other people in Berkshire County. I believe Home Instead.
Well, Home Instead saw a little press release that I put out.
Okay.
And they were so thrilled, and they were like, what the heck is Jim Sisto doing now?
Yeah.
And so they had a meeting. I didn't know what the meeting was about. When I found out that they wanted to know all about this guide, and once I showed it to them and gave them copies, and they went through it, and they go, wow, this is something that
very
we
comprehensive.
know our clientele will be
Right.
really needs. So they see a need. I'm going to do some continued marketing with them and radio shows and however I could get the word out
That's
that this
good.
is definitely something that would help a lot of people.
And I will help you get the word out. I'm going to want some of these for my support group people as well. So that's going to be good. Our time is coming close to the end of the show. Is there anything else that you would like to add? Anything in particular about your work in the community, working with people with Alzheimer's and their families?
It's very gratifying. Like I never see working with the elderly as being a burden. I love coming to work every day. I specifically chose this area of the law because it is a passion. I don't think of it as work, really. I mean, I have a great practice. It's a small practice. I have 2 full-time paralegals. We're very casual, yet we're very professional, and we make a lot of people happy. And people, what I hear a lot is, you've given me peace of mind. I can sleep a little. I feel a load's been lifted off my shoulders.
And that's good. And that's why we do this show, speaking of Alzheimer's, bring this to our community, and hopefully people who are faced with these kinds of issues have a way of getting more information. If you're the neighbor or a friend of someone facing these issues, please bring the information to them or access this guide, a guide to Alzheimer's care for yourself. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. My guest has been Jim Sisto, attorney here with the Berkshire Elder Law Center. Thank you so much.